Yellow.
Ryan,
Good morning, Nate. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too shabby. Looks like we're gonna have a good turnout for this, so that's good news. Good morning, everyone. Letting everyone in here as quickly as I can. So thanks for your patience. I think we'll give it another minute or two to make sure we've got everybody in the room and can hear us as this is an important topic, of course, to all of us. Okay, I don't. Oh, hold on before I speak too soon. Okay, seems that entry into the room is slowed down. And I think we have a great turnout here. So thanks everybody for your interest in our effort to try to find a way forward on funding the Michigan wine industry. Um, for those of you that joined us for the annual meeting in January, we brought Nate Love from Kelley-Cawthorne, who's our special guest today, in with us, along with some folks from Apples and New York and Willamette, to kind of give us an overview on how different funding mechanisms work in different interest industries throughout the nation. And now our plan moving forward is to segment those particular funding mechanisms so that we can have an in-depth discussion on each one. And part of that is because there's just not one silver bullet. There's not one answer on how we're going to fund the Michigan wine industry. So I think the best way forward from my perspective is to kind of learn how each function works, what opportunities we may see that lie within them, and then as certain groups become more familiar with how these mechanisms work, maybe we can all do our part and pursue these mechanisms to help move our industry forward. I do have a small agenda that I'm going to share here with the intent to keeping everyone's time in mind. And so I'll share that with everyone. And so here we go. First, why don't we introduce Nate Love from Kelley-Cawthorne. Nate, thanks for joining us today once again. Maybe just kind of give us a little overview on what you do with us and as far as the Michigan wine industry is concerned and how we got here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian, and thanks everybody else. So Nate Love with Kelley-Cawthorne. For anybody who doesn't know, Kelley-Cawthorne is a multi-client lobbying firm in Lansing, Michigan. We have about 150 clients, including the Michigan Wine Producers Association. So we're the voice of the wine industry here in Lansing. I've been with the firm for about, gosh, it's been over a decade now. And most of that time has been focused on, a couple different sectors, including the regulated industries, so alcohol, marijuana, things like that. But certainly, I think a more heavy focus on alcohol, and in particular the wine industry. Um, so as these conversations have sort of started up again, it's been something that uh, has been particularly interesting to me just because I do want to see the industry here grow. I think it's an important industry for the state. It does a lot and provides a lot of revenue for them. And frankly, it's just fun too, right? It's a fun thing to go out and do on the weekend, and hang out at a winery, right? It's a good thing for the state. But yeah, Brian, I don't know if you want me to just kind of dive in or if what you were thinking for format here, but
Sure. So I think what we should do is kind of review the three mechanisms that I know that have been discussed recently. One is HB 5270, I think it is. One is this wine marketing district idea, and then one is this licensing fees idea. So why don't we start with the HB 5270 and kind of I guess so. I'll start. HB 5270, from my understanding, is a bill that was introduced in Southwest Michigan to the House last November, and I believe, as it's written, suggests reappropriating state excise tax that is paid in by wine producers to help reconstruct an identity similar to what used to be the Grape and Wine Industry Council. So that's what I know of it. Any other background on that, Nate?
no, I mean, I think that's a good background. It was introduced by Pauline Wenzel, as you mentioned. She's out of Southwest Michigan. She's been a really great ally for the wine industry. She has what she calls the Wine Caucus, which anybody that's enthusiastic about wine in the state of Michigan that's a legislator can join, and they'll talk about issues that impact wine. They'll sample some wine, but it's a good way for folks to get involved. So she spearheads that. Um, but 5270, I think we run into a couple problems there. I think 5270 reflects sort of a dream scenario for the industry. Um, Unfortunately, it's not viable for a couple different reasons. Um, One of them is just there's a couple purely political reasons there, but the first one being that as much as I love Representative Wenzel, uh, she's a Republican in an election year in a legislature that is Democratic majority. So all of those bills are already fighting an uphill battle, even in non-election year. In an election year, she's in a safe seat, and I would still not be shocked if they just tamp down on any Republican bills, which is, probably not the way it should work, but is the way it works. Um, so that's something to be conscious of with the bill. The other part of it is, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit when we talked about this up in Traverse City. The wholesalers are a very powerful lobby in Lansing. As much as I love running headfirst into them, anything that touches the grape and the wine excise tax, beer excise tax, any alcohol excise taxes, will be it'll be inspected by them pretty heavily and most likely battled very heavily by them. In Michigan, beer and wine excise taxes haven't been raised since the Kennedy administration. And the wholesalers take a lot of pride in that. It's one of the big things that they sell their members on. It's one of the things that, you know, it's a point of personal pride too, for them. So it's another point that it just politically it's very difficult to get over the finish line, if not impossible. You know, I'd say we could fight them, but it would take, I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And even then it wouldn't be a guarantee of getting, you know, anything that touches the beer and wine excise tax over the finish line.
So
Uh,
I think part of the confusion with that particular piece is that the way that the producers view it is that this is excise tax that is already paid in as a manufacturer. And so it's, from our point of view, it's not necessarily anything that we're asking to increase the excise tax. We're just asking for it to be reappropriated. So why is that a conflict?
So they, and again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but this is how they will message it. They will message it as this is money that is going towards the Liquor Control Commission for enforcement and other things. This is not something that we can touch. And it'll be just a non-starter for them. And when you message it like that, it's very difficult to fight against. I mean, again, we could try, but it would take hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably a decade or more at the very least. And again, it's not even guaranteed to make it over the finish line. I mean, this is a group that is, as soon as legislators get into Lansing, are elected for their first term, they will immediately start talking to them and saying, here's why the three-tier system is good, here's why we don't touch these taxes, and here's why, you know, so it's not just fighting them on this particular issue, it's pushing back on decades and decades and decades of messaging to legislators and sort of having them unlearn something and then relearn it in a different way. So just for that alone, I mean, it's a massive, massive lift.
And and we're surprised to hear that, especially, you know, I think many of us are familiar with the Wholesalers Association, how much money they're talking about. We're surprised that 1.5 million would trigger this type of response. Maybe you could talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it could be $1 and they would still have, it's a principle thing more than a number thing for them. Again, it's personal, it's a point of pride. They sell the members on it. It becomes emotional, right? Which is not again, not a great thing to have when you're working issues in Lansing. But it does happen sometimes, and so it's a principle thing, right? Like you could rewrite statute so that it doesn't mention the three-tier system, but they still are able to do everything that they do today. And because it doesn't say three-tier in there, they would still fight it, right? It's sort of that principled approach to things that would cause the problem there. Because
Okay, so
in the grand scheme of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Brian, but in the
it's okay.
grand scheme of things, 1.5 million is not a big chunk of the state budget, right? I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars, but when you have to what they will say is, okay, well, it's 1.5 today. What's to stop it from being another 1.5 tomorrow and the day after that and after that? And we all know that that's, not how this works, right? Just because it's 1.5 today doesn't mean we're going to go back and ask for an increase tomorrow. But that's how they will look at it. They will look at anything as a very immediate threat that needs to be, you know, tamped down on very, very quickly.
And so I think the last piece of this topic and the last question that's kind of been what I've heard talking to several stakeholders in the industry is that um, isn't there another possibility, for example, if there was a groundswell and all 170 wineries in the state of Michigan and 300 farmers in the state of wine grape growers in the state of Michigan decided to band together and got all of our friends and signed a petition to put it on the ballot, how would that work?
Are you talking like a ballot initiative that would go to the statewide election?
Correct.
Like, that could work. But again, at that point, you're looking at millions of dollars, and the wholesalers will pour in millions of dollars on the other side. As a rule of thumb for a ballot initiative, I think before COVID, I would say probably need a 5 million. I mean, that number is easily doubled. To run a ballot initiative and have it be successful in Michigan right now, it probably costs at least $10 million. And that's for a relatively low profile one. Could it work? Sure. But again, I think we're throwing a lot of money at something that isn't a guarantee. And in an industry, the wine industry has ups and downs, right? A lot of what we do is based on the weather. If there's a bad freeze or something, that can be the difference between red or black on the books for a year. I think it's probably not the best spot to direct resources to. That would be more expensive than just a straight legislative fight, even.
Okay. So based on a lot of these issues that been uncovered through this HB 5270, there's two other mechanisms that have sparked. The next one being this wine marketing district, which is somewhat of a checkoff program for tasting rooms, I think. So maybe you can kind of describe that philosophy and how that would work.
Sure. So there's a couple different ways of approaching wine marketing districts, and we learned about them again last time. And after I was, quite a bit of a downer talking about House Bill 5270, I will start this by saying I think wine marketing districts and the next thing on the agenda, licensing fees, I think those are much more politically viable. I think the conversations that we have for the next two items are more about what we as an industry think makes the most sense, So prefacing that way, a wine marketing district is something that we've seen them use in Oregon and I believe New York as well. But essentially it would allow either a region or as we've sort of discussed it here in Michigan, it would be statewide. But it essentially overlays a set of boundaries where we would put a charge of a couple cents on top of the sale of a glass of wine. That all would be deposited into a fund with the state and then go to fund marketing programs at the Craft Beverage Council. Other states do it differently because they're a little bit more comfortable sending money to other organizations. I will say the appetite for that in Michigan's a little low. And frankly, the Craft Beverage Council is something that's already set up to handle marketing and promotion for the industry. And so I think from my perspective makes a lot of sense to send money there.
Meaning that it would be difficult to appropriate that particular revenue to the Michigan, an organization like the Michigan Wine Collaborative is what you're saying.
Yeah, so just by way of background, is it possible to appropriate things to a nonprofit organization in Michigan? Yes, it is. For something like this, what we see usually every year or so is an article in the Detroit News, and I can pull up examples for anybody who's interested. I think the last time it was the Trucking Association that got hit with this. Every year or so, a trade organization will get some money in the budget, and every year or so there is a very, very nasty headline, an article in some publication across the state about how the state is sending money to a private organization, and suddenly they're asking questions: where's this money going? What's it been used towards? Are you auditing it? Yeah, and I mean, it's just a list that goes on and on and on. And I've never seen an organization answer those questions well. Even if they answer them pretty well, it's still not a great headline. And typically we would see the funding, go away after that because they don't want to continue to have the headline, which is reasonable. It's an awkward position to be in as a legislator after there's been something in the media like that, and then you continue to fund it. So part of my job here in Lansing is, if we're going to have these conversations, I want to make sure that we're creating a long-term funding source while protecting the industry, and that automatically sending it to a private organization doesn't check two of those boxes, right? It would cause media problems, and also I would have questions about the long-term viability of the fund. Sorry.
That was my fault.
Sorry about that. No, we were having a mute issue. No, but it would, I do want to make sure that any of this funding does stick around for a long, long time so that we can, build on success as we achieve it. And especially with marketing and promotion, it's not, I don't think anybody thinks it's a one and done proposition, right? This is something that even with Pure Michigan, when they funded Pure Michigan, it wasn't a 1-year success story. This was something that they had to put lots of money into over a decade. But it took years for people to start going, oh, that's Tim Allen. He's promoting Michigan, and connecting the dots, and then, starting to see returns on that tourism. So the wine marketing, again, going back to the wine marketing districts, I think, again, self-imposing is much more politically viable, and frankly is a selling point to legislators at that point, because we're saying, look, we're putting skin in the game. We want to promote our industry, but we can't do it alone. And frankly, we're doing a lot for the state, and we think the state should do something to help us out. So that's sort of the idea behind a wine marketing district. It would allow us, some kind of say in how much we're putting in, based on when we draft the legislation. And that's the wonderful thing about building legislation is we can create it the way we want within reason.
There are some people that are requesting some time to ask questions or make comments. I have the Q&A portion after we get through the review of what the 3 mechanisms are. So please, I appreciate your patience. If you can hold on until then we'll be able to field the questions and comments as I have here under the Q&A session. So thanks for your patience. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. I think we're moving on to the last one now too. Licensing fees. It's a similar conversation to wine marketing districts, right? It would give us control over over how much we put in, generally speaking, and would allow us to direct it to an entity like the Craft Beverage Council that that can then put things in there. I will say the one thing I like a little bit more about the licensing fees aspect. I think there's a couple things. First of all, with wine marketing districts, it's a little bit of the honor system on, okay, I sold, 100,000 glasses of wine this year, so I need to remit X dollars. Um, Short of an audit, there's no real way to tell if somebody sold 200 and they, 200,000 glasses of wine and they're just saying they sold 100,000 because they don't want to remit money back. Again, profit margins are thin sometimes. Licensing fees, obviously, it's a little bit more insulated from the ups and downs of the industry. If we have a bad year, we still have to pay licensing fees. The amount paid in the licensing fee is going to be less, I think, generally speaking, per winery, than a per glass fee, right? I mean, we'd still get quite a bit of money coming in, but if we only increase licensing fees by $500, then we're not looking at, okay, I sold X number of glasses of wine, suddenly I have to cut a $5,000 check to the state. It's okay, I reliably have this $500 fee that I pay every year, and I know it goes towards marketing and promotion of the industry. And in that way, again, if we have a bad year, it's insulated. So I think the next question is, of the three, which is the most successful or viable way forward? Again, I think number two or number three are probably equally viable. It probably comes down to what we as an industry want to see, and what makes sense for us. So as I've been having those conversations, I've had some folks that like the districts more. I think I've heard more folks say that they like the licensing fee concept. But that's an ongoing conversation. And obviously, one of the favorite phrases around Lansing is, I like the sound of that, but show me the bill, and I'll have to take a look at it. And that's a fair thing to have to say on this issue too.
Yeah, I think especially with the conversations I've been having, and on the first on the wine marketing district piece, I think the concern is any type of the phrase I continue to hear is the devil's in the details. And so being able to frame anything that's in a wine marketing district would have to consider those that see 20 people in their tasting room a year versus those that see 110,000 people through their tasting room every year. So there has to be some sort of level of a cap, number one, because I think one of the comments that I hear often are, particular wineries or particular regions will be supporting most of the industry, and will that be equitable in the representation they receive in the marketing? And then on the other side of that would be, we only see this amount of people in our tasting room every year. Why are we being, taxed per glass when we're not even, seeing enough traffic to move the needle? And so that's some of the concerns that I've heard with that. The licensing fee conversation is an interesting one because, what we're talking about is actually increasing the fees on ourselves, when that's not how this conversation started. And that's where some of the comments I hear on that particular topic gets a little heated, is because, when people started talking about reappropriating excise tax, it was the thing that this is money that we can draw a direct line from point A. This is what we've paid to point B, and we can see that it's already paid in to the general fund. Whereas now we're talking about increasing the fees on ourselves as an industry, which your point is that the state wants to see some sort of skin in the game, or somehow are we helping ourselves before we're asking for help to begin with. Another concern that I've discussed with several stakeholders is the concern of these dollars for the marketing district and the licensing fees going to the Craft Beverage Council. Because there's many people, frankly, that feel like the Craft Beverage Council isn't necessarily representing their business in the wine industry. And so how can we feel good or understand that the dollars that we're contributing to the Craft Beverage Council for marketing will then be directly spent on wine industry specific marketing? Can you give us some information on that or how that would work?
Yeah, so well, first of all, I will say one of the things when the Craft Beverage Council was first created, obviously it was born out of the ashes of the Grape and Wine Council. The reason the Grape and Wine Council went away in the first place, or one of the reasons, was that everybody wanted a seat at the table. When we drafted that legislation, it was drafted to put more wine representation than any other industry on there. You can still see that today. The wine industry does have more seats on the council than anybody else. There's also only 3 places, for marketing that they could send it. They can send it to beer, they can send it to wine, or they can send it to spirits. So, I don't want to be dismissive of concerns that, we don't want to fund a giant beer campaign off of wine licensing fees, which I think is a valid concern. But at the same time, there's only so many places this can go. And I think, Drink Michigan Wine is probably, I'm not a marketing guy, but I think Drink Michigan Wine is probably a more effective slogan or catchphrase or hook than Drink Michigan Craft Beverages, right? So, but again, I think that's for the marketing people to get at. But again, one of the other issues we've seen, and we saw it with the Grape and Wine Council too, was that we never really funded either of these properly. I mean, right now the Craft Beverage Council is funded enough to do some good work with what the money they have is, and they have a couple employees. But to really see what they're capable of, I mean, would take millions of dollars, right? And that's what we're trying to get at is throw some actual solid money at them and watch what they're able to do. Part of the reason I think folks are a little dubious of the Craft Beverage Council is, again, because they don't see it do a ton because they can't, to have a good marketing program, again, would take at least $1 million, $1.5 million. And that's not funding that the council sees every year. I mean, that's what they get total, and that's after employee costs and all this other stuff, research grants, that number gets pretty small pretty quickly.
Okay, I think I have covered most of the review here. And now I'd like to open it up to some questions for folks that are spending their time with us. One person sent in this question earlier, anticipating the Q&A session. I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe review again. Why can't the wine industry pursue a return of excise tax paid by Michigan wineries on wine sold in Michigan to fund a wine industry only organization? And one of the thoughts that comes to mind is a conversation I had with how the Michigan wine industry can certainly prove that sales tax in general or excise tax has increased over the past 20 years. And shouldn't the state be cognizant of that? Because we've added so many wineries in the past 20 years and increased that sales tax over time and increased our excise tax over time. Why can't we touch the stuff that we're contributing?
Yeah, no, I mean, and like I said, I think that represents an ideal world, right? Where we're able to direct the taxes that we're paying as we want. but again, anything that touches the beer and wine, excuse me, the beer and wine excise tax is going to immediately be a non-starter for the wholesalers. It's a fight uh, that we've tried to get into before, and it's just always been a non-starter for them. And when they uh, spend resources on orders of magnitude more than the industry spends in Lansing, it's just not it's not a fight that we're able to win. Um, that's again, I do think industry promotion is important, but that's I think why we need to look at ourselves a little bit and say, okay, well, if we can't do anything with excise taxes, what are some other ways where we can, what are some other ways we can do this? And I think those conversations that we're having have been fairly fruitful. No pun intended. Um, but uh, but certainly they're ongoing and are going to require a lot of industry buy-in.
So I think the best way to move forward, so not everyone is jumping on the floor at the same time, is if you have a question or a comment for Nate, please just let me know in the chat and I will call on you in order that I receive them. So the first person that I have here on the floor is Paul Hamlin. Paul, go ahead. Floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So for most of you who don't know, I'm one of the owners of Verterra Winery up in the Traverse City area. And so just as a point of orientation, Nate, I have a series of questions to kind of ask so that I have a better background on what's happening. So there's the talk about we need more marketing funds in the wine industry. I get that. And apparently there's been some historical context or discussions with the government or with the sponsor of the bill, Pauline, about what would be an appropriate amount of money that would be funded by the state. And is that where the $1.5 million comes from? Or
Yeah, so that these conversations started last budget cycle, so 2002, 2003. We had a lot of money coming in from the federal government as a result of COVID relief dollars. And that allowed the state government to sort of do a little shell game and free up a lot of dollars for other things. So we're still feeling those effects, and that caused a conversation for us to, come together and say, okay, well, if this budget surplus that the state is so high, and all these other groups that were hit hard during the pandemic are benefiting, this seems like a natural fit for us as well. So we started having conversations. I think in one chamber, we have quite a bit of support for $1 million and a half in state funding. Obviously, you need both chambers and the governor to actually get it across the finish line. So as we had those conversations with the other chamber, it became very clear very quickly that they wanted to see some skin in the game from the industry. And this was something that that sentiment had been expressed in the first chamber as well, where we were getting a lot.
So that's why, sorry to interrupt, Nate, but that's why I asked the question, because I wanted to get to the next question, which is skin in the game. How much are we talking about here that the industry needs to put forward in conjunction with, so are we talking $200,000? Are we talking $1 million from the industry combined with the state money of $1.5 million? What is being talked about as a fair balance, or what's a number that we're looking for?
That's a very good question. I think that number can be a little bit squishy, right? So it's one of those things where I could tell you if we came up with $50,000, they would look at us and laugh and say, try again. the flip side of that is $1 million is, they would love to see that. And obviously, again, we could do a lot with $1 million, but I think that's probably a little bit too much for the industry to bear right now, especially since we're just getting something like this off the ground. So realistically, somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 is probably what we would be looking at. I think that's a reasonable number. It shows that we're serious about promoting the industry and working with the state to do so. But it's not so overly onerous on individual wineries, just by virtue of, the math, either through licensing fees or, a per glass fee through a wine marketing district. It's manageable. It's not going to put anybody out of business for doing that.
So that is a very important number for us as owners across the state. And that's part of why you're getting probably you're getting wishy-washy responses from us, because we're all sitting here saying, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a bread box, or are we talking about the entire wheat industry here?
Right.
And so once you start to define it, now we can all work into a model that says, okay, well, if it's 200,000 and there's 250 wineries in the state, or 150, whatever the number, now we can start to put a framing effort around it. That also then has implications as to how we go about self-funding it when we know what that is all about. Okay. So that's the first time I've heard that, and I'm optimistic that we could do this if it's in that kind of range. But more later on that from my perspective. Third thing, I agree. I don't want to go to war with the distributors. It's not productive. So, and that's just my personal opinion. Everyone else, across the state will have to weigh into that, but that's a path that will take us nowhere, and it'll waste a lot of time and energy and lead in frustration. I do think we need to be able to do some level of self-funding here in the industry, which then brings me to my next comment, which is I don't know how or why, but the whole discussion about excise taxes as a way to self-fund, I don't think is in the context that we've been talking about it up here in the Traverse City area. The use of excise taxes is a way to understand who has to pay a penny per gallon, because it is a hard and fast number at the end of every year that all of us pay based on what we're producing. And it's a way to get away from how many glasses does winery A pour a year versus winery B versus winery C, and all of that, which is fraught with ways to misinterpret data. It's really straightforward when you're using it as a model, excise taxes annually per winery, when you use that as a model to determine what the winery has to pay in self-funding. Does that make a little bit more sense, hopefully?
Yeah, and I think that's why we were trying to look at the idea of the wine marketing district as sort of a stand-in, obviously it is on top of what's existing already, but looking at, okay, maybe this person is doing more business, so we're gonna,
and that can be done too on licensing fees too, as we know. I mean, you can tier it based on the amount of gallons that you're producing annually, and tier it so that it's more fair. So any of those approaches, I think, will fundamentally give us a more accurate, less interpretive way to self-fund.
Right.
One other though comment, sorry, and I don't mean to be a ball hog here, guys, but it's the first time I've had somebody really good to talk to about this whole topic, which is the following. It really delves around the Craft Beverage Council. here's the issue that many of us are concerned about. Right now, you're right. Craft Beverage Council is made up, for marketing efforts for the three different alcohol industries, if you will. But you know as well as I do, Nate, as soon as you plug in $1.5 million at the state level for wine initiatives and throw in another $200,000 to $500,000 that's self-funded from the wineries, there's going to be a brawl at the Craft Beverage Council because beer and spirits are going to want that money too. So where we need, I think, part of your help, or maybe as part of the Craft Beverage Council, is rewriting the bylaws and rewriting how they're going to deal with that in such a way that we feel is the wine industry, that we're a little bit protected. Those funds that we're generating will come back to the wine industry's marketing and not be diverted, because we lived through this with the dissolution of the Michigan Grape Council. There was a lot of concern, well, okay, that's going to get diverted, and sure enough, it did. So there's precedent there, and that's what we all as a wine industry, I think, want to protect, is just protect that we don't go down that path again.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm quiet. I'll be quiet now.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because again, I kind of alluded to this, but I don't think I really discussed it too much. When we drafted the Craft Beverage Council legislation, again, we wanted to make sure that there was more wine representation on there than anybody else. And we were successful in that. If beer and spirits are going at it too to try and get this money, there is some sort of consensus that's needed to get it out the door. So they're going to ultimately, if they can't agree on if everybody can't agree on the council, then it's not like beer with 2 votes can suddenly just ram $1.5 million in funding through. But to your point too, I think being careful about it, and being purposeful, and making sure that folks know where the money's coming from and that it's coming from wine. It gets harder and harder for them to justify taking money that isn't coming from them for their purposes. That's never easy politically.
Yeah, but there's also, sorry, one other comment, I can't help myself, which is at the Craft Beverage Council, you're correct. But you then still run into a situation where the programs for the spend of that wine industry money would have to still be approved. There are more votes that are non-wine than wine. So what happens is if the beer industry and the spirit industry say, hey, that's a great marketing campaign, go spend your money on that. But the wine guys are saying, that's not going to do anything to help us. Their 2 votes, which I believe there's only 2 that are wine related on the Craft Beverage Council, won't overcome the other votes. So I'm still struggling with, how do we make sure that the dollars are allocated for wine, but the right marketing programs are created for wine?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that in an ideal world, we build guardrails into the legislation about where the money goes to. I think a broader conversation with the department is probably needed to figure out, what's a viable way of getting the most return on our investment. What the best way of going about doing that is. But again, even if we're putting in 200,000 and getting $1.5 million back for even seeing a third of that, I mean, I would still argue that's a pretty good return on investment. But again, that's part of the reason why we're having those conversations is figuring out what as an industry is a tolerable, what's tolerable, what's not, and what's what we're willing to do and what we're willing to not do in the context of being in the beverage industry, not just the wine industry.
I have a couple questions, Nate. One is, when is the last time that licensing fees for wineries was increased?
I could not tell you. Decades. It's small enough that without prompting, sometimes I'm asked about it and try to give a good answer, but do have to admit that it's very low because the last time it was raised was at a time where the dollar went a lot further.
And the my follow-up question for that is for when we talk about wine licensing fees, when the Michigan Wine Collaborative talks about wine producers, we use a number of 170. But we know that there are at least double the amount of winery licensees out there in the state of Michigan. Any idea or any comments to make about that? I would assume that they would fall under this category as well. For example, a brewery that decided to get a winery license so that they could provide wine as part of their offering. Is that true?
Yep, yeah, they would be subject to this as well. When you rope those guys in, I think we're looking at about between winemakers, small winemakers, in state is probably about 400 to 500, if I remember correctly. So we would get a revenue boost there as well. And this was something that we kind of have looked at over having conversations with this as well. Is there an effective way to just completely carve out the breweries, and then kind of looked inwards again and said, well, hold on, the breweries are also benefiting from having the wine license, right? If they're selling wine in there or they're selling cider in there, then they are benefiting from the industry. And a $500, license fee increase is not, that's a manageable number of glasses of beer that they have to sell to make up that $500, so that has been part of the conversation as well.
Okay, I don't see anyone else in chat. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Mr. Love while we have him? We have about 9 minutes left. Okay. I don't see any coming forward at this point. I do appreciate your time, Nate. Oh, hold on. I do have one person, Dave Miller. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I just wanted to throw in the comment too that all of this should be looked at as an investment in the industry. If we look at other states that have support either through a per liter tax that goes back to the industry or a gallo tax on wine sales in the state like Washington has, those things go back to the industry. And if we look at these states that have been where we are if they've been there in the past, looking where they're at now, Oregon, Washington, New York, literally have hundreds of wineries. So I think we should keep in mind that putting these kinds of funds together, we could see the number of wineries in the state double or triple or even more than that. And so the amount of revenue that would be generated from that would be tremendous, across the board in terms of tourist visits, jobs in the wineries, taxes paid, however you want to measure it. So I think that should be an important part of the conversation when we're going to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think what our end goal is growing the industry, whether it's more business for existing folks or getting new folks in the door. That's what we're hoping to do here. At least that's what I'm hoping to do.
Any other questions or comments for Nate before we get off the call here?
Brian, could I just interject one other comment?
Sure.
This is Paul. Sorry about that.
Go ahead.
So just doing some simple math, if we use, Nate, some of your numbers, which there are potentially 400 to 500 small winemaker licenses in the state. Some of those could be breweries as well, but just ballpark using 450 is the number. 450 licenses to get to 200,000 is $450 a year. If you get to $500,000, it's going to be $1,000 per license per year. Fairly reasonable numbers, I think, personally, given the impact that it could have with obtaining a matching fee from the state of $1.5 million. We could do some great things with this.
Thanks for sketching that out for us, Paul. I think that's a really good point. I think some of the things I heard on the call today were, one, we certainly want to find a way where we don't ruffle the feathers of the wholesalers, because that's a fight that at this point we don't have the appetite to move forward with. I think another thing I heard today was, at least from those of us that have mentioned, we are interested in finding a mechanism to fund the industry ourselves so that we can show the legislature that we have skin in the game. And when we talk about, you know, either self-regulation with a checkoff system or increasing licensing fees, it seems to me of the two, the more transparent and the more controllable may be something along the lines of licensing fees. And I'm saying that based on what I heard today. You may not agree with me, but I think that's what I heard at least. And I think the number that we just heard from Paul was about $1,000 on licensing fees per license. That could generate some good momentum for marketing for Michigan wine. Any last comments, parting comments, anything that anyone would like to say or ask? Okay, well,
Thank you for putting it together.
Thank you. And thanks, Nate, again for your time today.
Yeah,
I think we have a better understanding of how the legislative side will work. For those of you that have continued interest in learning more, we will have more conversations moving forward as town halls. The next one is scheduled for, I believe, May 1st. And that will be discussing a checkoff program. I just received confirmation from Diane Smith at Apples. She's willing to get on a call with us and kind of talk with us on how that works for her industry. I've also reached out to Chad Riedners at Blueberries to kind of have him describe how it works in the blueberry industry as well. And as I mentioned before, I don't believe there's one silver bullet that's going to get us to where we want to be. And being able to understand these funding mechanisms and being able to identify ourselves which ones will work for us, kind of in the direction that we did today, is going to be the best way forward. So I appreciate all of you for your interest in this. Thank you, Nate, for joining us, and I look forward to having more of these conversations in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Brian.
much.
Thank you for having me.